The best way to avoid the counteroffensive would be to attack like they did last year in September. That way, by the time their momentum ends, it's rain season and the enemy can't counterattack.
I'm clearing my calendar for September.
The first one is that Ukraine haven't launched their own offensive. If they haven't launched it, that means that they have the capabilities to do so, which means that that there's a risk involved, a huge risk involved. If Russia launches this offensive, it fails, Ukraine can launch a counteroffensive, and it will be devastating for the Russian forces. So there's this kind of game of chicken, who launches the offensive first.
But if the Russian front in Crimea pushes towards Liman, and then there's another push south, like you said, it really squeezes the troops in Siversk.
But of course, it's easy to draw arrows.
For the
viewers, arrow can
viewers,
take half a year.
I was thinking about it. The only thing that could really stop the Ukrainian offensive against Bakhmut, or rather counteroffensive, for once that it's actually a counteroffensive and not counteroffensive every time Ukraine goes on the attack. In Bakhmut, it would actually be a counteroffensive. But the only thing that could stop the Ukrainians is a Russian attack on Siversk. This salient is really on the flanks of Bakhmut city. If the Russians manage to clear this area, perhaps with Wagnerians, who knows, or whoever's available, if they don't even have to push out of Bakhmut. If they secure this entire salient north of the city, I don't see how the Ukrainians could even really attempt to retake the city.
So the problem with this front is that if you remember previously, Russians have captured Liman. They have captured the entire the Siversk forestry region all along the Siversky Donetsk River, and the south of it is the Siversk front. And then the Russians are also below. They are still basically more or less the same front, just that less Soledar or something. That Siversk front itself, I'm not sure is commanded by who. Seems to be really good at defending. The Russians always have no ways to break through into the Siversk front, and so even if they do not have the northern flank of the Siversk front, where along the entire river, the north of the river, let's say the Russians at the Crimea do a counteroffensive, capture Liman, that will have no bearing on Siversk somehow. But that's just my opinion. So
but what I mean is that imagine they attack Siversk from the south, like that city Vanseti. Imagine the Russians. Imagine they go there and they just push north with whatever troops they have, take Siversk. Nothing too complicated.
I don't think they will be able to do it.
I actually think it's very likely that happens. I mean, of course, like one of the most obvious points in the line where the Russians are probably going to start dumping in a lot of resources for offensives is definitely Avdiivka. But outside of Avdiivka, the area of Siversk seems kind of like a no-brainer, especially if the ultimate goal, which I do believe the ultimate war goal for the Russians is probably Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. There's two cities were like basically the birthplace of the Donbass rebellion. The Donbass rebels were forced to abandon them pretty early on. I think the Russians, really want to retake those two cities, and the path to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk straight from Bakhmut is pretty tumultuous as long as the Ukrainians still have positions in Siversk and Chasiv Yar. Honestly, I've seen like a lot of like kind of whack opinions on this online, but like some people seem to think that Chasiv Yar is going to fall pretty easily, and it's definitely not. It's a very, very fortified position. It's on top of the high ground in the area. It's surrounded on all sides by forests. Like, these are just absolutely ideal conditions for the Ukrainian army so far in the war. Not to mention when you get on top of this hill and into the town of Chasiv Yar, it's just a bunch of commie blocks and high rises. So it's the same, a lot of the same issues you're dealing with Bakhmut. I don't think it would be. I mean, obviously the Russians are going to have to try to take on this area eventually. But I don't think it would be the wisest decision to dive into that immediately after conquering Bakhmut. It's going to be a difficult fight, and to have these two very long slogs back to back, it's just not probably not going to be good for morale. The Russians could advance basically in two different directions. One straight north from Soledar to Siversk, and the other kind of in a northwesterly direction, in the direction of Sloviansk. If you give me a second, I need to grab the name of the town. For those of you guys, well, I guess nobody's really looking at a map right now, but
I'll add maps in the edits.
Vasyukivka. So, there's a road that leads up from Vasyukivka and reconnects with this. It's on Google Earth. It's called the E40 highway, but I think they call it something different.
It goes behind Siversk.
Yeah. Right, correct. So if the Russians they can kind of branch out and fan out in multiple different directions from that intersection and really bloom out from there.
And you know what? You're right, because, well, I talked about it in my videos, and I think you guys all talked about this possibility. But if you look at the map, it's pretty clear, and I'll put it in the edits. But if the Russian front in Crimea pushes towards Liman, and then there's another push south, like you said, it really squeezes the troops in Siversk. And this also brings them within a stepping stone, or I don't know how you say it, near Slaviansk. So they can literally jump from there, and they're going to threaten the entire cities of Slaviansk, Chasiv Yar. And this move, the dangerous part of this move is that it extends the positions that the Ukrainians have to defend. I think the thing with Bakhmut is that the Ukrainians had to defend one place, so they could send all the reinforcements there. If they push north, we're all being tactical armchair generals, I know, but if they push north, they're going to threaten Slaviansk, they're going to threaten Chasiv Yar, they're going to threaten multiple places, perhaps Kramatorsk. So the Ukrainians will have to send the few reserves that they have, and it's going to be, once again, the advantage of attrition, of the guy that has the more troops. So that could very well happen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you entirely. I mean, it went from essentially Ukraine having to defend two primary logistic hubs of Siversk and Bakhmut that are feeding the front line to now defending essentially five, because you have Siversk, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and then you have Druzhkivka and several others. I mean, that general metropolitan area there kind of equals like another city of like similar size. Konstantinivka in Chasiv Yar, which kind of blocks the way to Konstantinivka. And then, of course, you have Toretsk, too, which, isn't talked about much because there hasn't really been a lot of fighting in the Toretsk-Gorlivka area since the beginning of the war. It's actually been one of like the few quiet places on the front line. Not entirely quiet. Like, obviously, you get artillery strikes and stuff in that area. But the Russians really haven't tried to advance in that direction yet.
And this is where I think the Wagnerians will intervene with the assault, the storming of Avdiivka. They said roughly a month. I don't know how much time they need, but let's say they need a month. 2 months. Okay, 2 months.
2 months.
Okay, 2 months. Imagine in 2 months from now, we're going to be in the middle summer, like end of summer, August. So imagine they attack in Avdiivka. From Avdiivka, if this explodes, like if this choke point explodes, you get in the back of the Ukrainian line in Konstantinivka and everything. So there is, as we can see now, there is some operations that could be coordinated that most analysts just ignore because they think the Russian army is done. They're all destroyed. But we should not underestimate their offensive capabilities. And like Weeb said, and like New World Econ said, there's a lot of troops in reserve that haven't been active, just sitting around. And I think that if they do an attack in the north towards Liman and all this to destroy this Siversk salient, plus one in Avdiivka, is going to get really, really tight. It's not going to be pleasant, to the point where the Ukrainians might once again have to delay their counteroffensive. Counteroffensive, of course,
So I actually did a video, the secret plans of the Russian offensive, though. and then it was talking mainly about the Bakhmut front. And in the video, I mentioned that the Russians did not really need to attack Siversk, or even fight within the Siversk front per se, because if you actually look at the highway from Bakhmut, the highway all the way to Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, basically if they just progress another 10 kilometers, they will hit a junction that will allow them to attack northward towards Rai Oleksandrivka. And if they capture Rai Oleksandrivka and then they move further up and capture Mykolaiivka, basically Siversk, the entire salient at Siversk will be have tremendous problems in terms of resupply and reinforcement, because then the only route left to go to Siversk is through Liman. And that's when the Crimea offensive towards Liman is going to then squeeze the Siversk front. There's no need to actually attack Siversk. To me, actually, there's no need to do that, because once you hit the rear, there's no need to attack the stronghold of Siversk, and especially the highway all the way to Rai Oleksandrivka, Mykolaiivka, just east of Sloviansk. Those places, there are some entrenchment there, but it's not as crazy as in the Siversk front. And I'm quite sure that the Ukrainians are very busy digging up all the entrenchment since the previously when they were threatened, because the Russians were moving down the highway, and then the Ukrainians are panicking, and then they were like, because they have a tactical HQ at Minkivka, which is just off the highway where the front line is now. They were afraid that the Russians will continue to push up the highway. Sorry.
So you think that the Russians could launch could penetrate deep into enemy rears, like in a double attack, penetrate through two axes deep into enemy rears to cut them off, right?
So if let's say the Russian forces at Crimea launch a Liman offensive, that is already threatening the resupply route through Liman to Siversk, and then they can only now resupply through small roads along the Siversky Donetsk River, because there was originally another route, which is where Vasilkivka was, Krasnopolivka, Mykolaiivka, the Sako Ivaseti. That's a place. That road there is already gone because the Russian forces have captured that junction. So as a result, there's only two small roads and one main road, and the main road is going through Liman. And if you go into the rear at Rai Oleksandrivka and Mykolaiivka, basically all the small roads are gone. There's only one road left, which actually go through Zakivne, and then there's go all the way to Liman. And Liman is a dangerous place because Liman is actually pretty close to the front line. And if the Russians also launch an offensive to recapture Liman, then the entire Siversk front can become obsolete, like instantly. So the same thing I would say goes for Toretsk. Toretsk and New York is totally unimportant. Strategically, they are just as a defense line, but they can be just cut off easily. So is Adievka. Adievka is just three towns away from operationally encircled. So technically, you don't even need to siege. You don't even need to enter the city. If you can basically just encircle it. The problem is the Russians don't like to do encirclement. They only like to do partial encirclement, and then they leave a gap open and then let them run. So if you really close, the entire force is surrounded, and you can do it multiple places. But of course, it's easy to draw arrows.
For the viewers,
arrow can take half a year.
Yeah, for the viewers, the reason why the Russians don't like full encirclements is to avoid the Azov-style situation where the guys hold until the end. It's just too long. They prefer them running away. In my videos, I call it the Mongol strategy. They prefer them to just leave the position so they can capture it. New World Econ, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say I do slightly disagree with what Wyatt just said on one point. I don't think you can count out Toretsk as being not strategically important. This is kind of like I guess it's not the most important city in the area. The most important city in this area is probably Konstantinivka, because this is where a lot of these major highways meet up. There's a major road, which, isn't. I actually tried to search it once on Google Maps to see what the time was, and there's like gaps in the road, so it doesn't really work. But there's a major highway, the Donetsk Ring Road, that actually connects up on the outside of Avdiivka, or I'm sorry, not Avdiivka, Konstantinivka, as well as 2 major roads that come down and connect virtually all of like Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, that whole conglomeration of cities with the Donetsk and Makivka area. So like, I mean, there's a huge crossroads in there, and if Ukrainians lose access to any of that, I think they're going to be in pretty big trouble in the Donbass.
What he means is that you don't have to directly attack it. Is that, yes, it is important, but what he means is that if you look at a map, you can easily bypass
at great cost. Yeah,
you can bypass it from Avdiivka. You know, if you take Avdiivka, you push north, it's only fields, and Toretsk becomes a new salient like Siversk. So you know,
yeah, which is a good point. And
a weeb.
Yeah, this whole discussion is very interesting. I think the point we've reached is actually very interesting, because we haven't reached a new point. We've just returned to an old point, and that is, I mean by that, last summer there was this influx of Western analysts saying, okay, Russia has 3 ways they can encircle the Donbass. They can do step number 1, which is the smallest one. They can encircle Siversk by taking the E40 road that we have been talking about. The second option was to do by the border of the Donbass region. And then the third one is going all the way around and hitting Dnipro straight ahead. I think those 3 options are the ones that we are actually looking at today. If the Russians decide to launch an offensive, they now have the number of troops, they have mobilized the forces, they have trained the forces, they have everything ready for such an operation. The only thing holding them back are 2 things. The first one is that Ukraine haven't launched their own offensive. If they haven't launched it, that means that they have the capabilities to do so, which means that that there's a risk involved, a huge risk involved. If Russia launches this offensive, it fails, Ukraine can launch a counteroffensive, and it will be devastating for the Russian forces. So there's this kind of game of chicken, who launches the offensive first, and whoever launches the offensive first will most definitely get hit by a counteroffensive. That is what I predict. If one launches an offensive, the other will launch a counteroffensive. So it is a very risky situation, especially we return to the Ukrainians. They cannot hold out this battle of attrition. So essentially what the Russians are trying to do is that they're trying to force the Ukrainians to launch an offensive so they can launch their counteroffensive. As Ian said, there's a lot of tanks and so on in Rostov, in Belgorod, and so on. They are ready to fight. They are just not needed yet. They are needed when they launch their offensive. So essentially, we're in this scenario where Ukraine has to launch their offensive as soon as possible. It was called the Spring Offensive, but we are on the 24th of May. There's a week left of spring, so it is essentially summer.
It's interesting because in that case, the best way to avoid the counteroffensive would be to attack like they did last year in September. That way, by the time their momentum ends, it's rain season, and the enemy can't counterattack.
Yes, but if they wait until August or September, then they would have had 3 months of Russian constant shelling on their positions, which could completely decapitate their ability to launch an offensive in the first place.
100%. I agree with you. I'm just saying that to add to the argument of what you said of the deadly counterattack, if you attack right before rain, well, the Russians will not be able to counterattack in time, and then it's winter season and they can launch part 2. Perhaps their goal of the offensive was always to attack later, and they just say spring offensive just to keep the Western public, enticed.
Excited.
Yeah, okay. Excited.
I'm clearing my calendar for September.
You make a really great point there, though. But like this isn't said enough. But like the Ukrainians, they make all these real big media statements, like we're going on an offensive, in a week or in 2 weeks. It's all complete bullshit. Complete bullshit. No army ever is going to announce exactly when they're going to launch an offensive. So, I mean, I had probably said this a couple times. I've speculated that maybe there was going to be a spring offensive, but I knew right away when they were saying, well, we're going to launch it in May, that shit's not coming in May. It probably isn't going to come in June. It might come in July. And another reason for this that some people have said is that Ukraine actually had a longer rainy season in the spring than they typically have. A lot of that precipitation that usually comes towards the end of winter actually came in the spring. So the ground is going to be wetter longer. The black soil in Ukraine, it's a lot thicker. It goes down a lot deeper. It takes a lot longer for that to solidify. So, maybe that's perhaps one reason. I actually lean more towards it was never going to happen when they were saying it was going to happen anyways. And it's all talk. It's just to keep the other side on their toes. I mean, this is part of fighting a war.
I don't think the Russians said they would launch a winter offensive. I think it's the West that said the Russians would launch.
I don't know. That's perhaps it was
which they did, right?
I conjured it up all on my own. I don't know, but I don't think this is just all part of warfare. It's all like on the information front.
I think
there's a quick point that I wanted to make about the summer as well is that the summer, in my opinion, is very much in favor of the Russians. It is a very historical fact. Everyone keeps talking about General Winter is the best friend of Russia. But in this war specifically, General Summer is also on the Russian side. And I say this because the thing that made the summer very, very beneficial for the Germans in World War II is that they had a lot of mechanized units and they had very difficulty adapting to the cold because Germany isn't nearly close to as cold as Russia is in the winter and so on. But the thing is, in the summer, there's also the fact that it is warm. And warm weather means that fires burn warmer and it is more difficult to turn them off, all of these things. So fires are much more effective in the summer. It is even to the point that it's documented back in The Art of War that in the summer, that is when you use fire. And what is something that the Russians have a lot more than the Ukrainians? That is firepower. The Russians' artillery shells, missile strikes, and so on will all be much more effective in the summer than in the winter or in the spring or in the fall. And that is what they're focusing on. If the Ukrainians do not launch an offensive, then the Russians will just burn everything down. And it will be much more effective in the summer. So for the Russians, they have two options. First, they launch an offensive, which the Ukrainians will launch a counteroffensive. So that is probably out of the question. And the second option is that they just wait until Ukraine launches their offensive. Then they will be attacking and launching artillery strikes, missile strikes, air strikes, and so on Ukrainian positions all the time until they launch their own offensive, after which, well, they can launch their counteroffensive. So essentially, for Russia, they don't care about the season, they don't care about the position, they don't care about the territory. The only thing they want is to react to whatever Ukraine does, and they've prepared for every scenario. It seems. Don't quote me on that, because we have seen Russia do some dumb shit this war.
The polls about the fall of Bakhmut. that was it fooled us.
Yeah, I did a monthly poll on my channel. Every month I would ask, when will Bakhmut fall?
It can't get better. It can't get better than me.
About 70% would say the same month as we were in, all the way from March. And finally, the ones who said before June, they were right.
I just want to add, Putin weaponized summer. No, I'm so disappointed. Putin always weaponized everything. Now he weaponized summer too.
To throw rain. Yeah.
There's actually an article that states that Ukrainian officials said that the Russians weaponized the rain against Ukraine.
I was about to ask that. What do you guys think of that? Because cloud seeding is a thing. Do you think that's something the Russians are actually doing?
I know that it is a technology that the Chinese have.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, it happens. They do it in Dubai, don't they?
Oh.
Don't they cloud seed there? Yeah, it's not like a.
It is
I don't know how
thing,
well
yes.
it works, and I might just be parroting some.
If your channel disappears, then you're right.
It can work because it is used in China, it's used in Singapore. So whenever there's drought-like weather, dry weather, governments do try to seed the clouds. It is a hit and miss, because if the wind blow, then it goes to another country, and it's like you feed another country water. So, I mean, yeah.
But one thing you mentioned about the Ukrainians always talking about offensive. On a side note, it reminds me of what the situation between China and Taiwan is, that they're constantly teasing, constantly, always going into enemy airspace, always saying, yeah, offensive. The Chinese, 10 years, they can do it. It's not even in weeks, in years, until that one day where the Taiwanese won't respond because they think it's just yet another exercise, and it can go down like this.
But in the battlefield, right, the thing is everything can be seen nowadays. It's a bit different from what war used to be. Like now, there's satellites, there's drones. So if you want to scam or mislead the Russians, saying that you're not going to do an offensive, and then you do an offensive, there is a build up to an offensive, and every location you can keep. Of course, you can also keep all these equipments in one place and then wait for the time. But the moment these equipments get spotted, they get destroyed. So not so easy, I guess, to so-called spring a surprise. Usually, my assumption is always for example, whatever the Ukrainians are doing, the Russians tends to know, and whatever the Russians are doing, the Ukrainians tends to know, because I don't underestimate their intelligence capability. So they definitely know way more than what we do on open source information. So yeah, so yeah, it's a bit hard. I just think it's a bit hard.
And not New World Decon.
I use coin. I just use coin toss. I say, is the Ukrainians going to launch an offensive? No,
I don't want to be canceled. I am not.
Dude, I already have my strategy laid out for me. I think, okay, now that I don't have Bakhmut to milk, I have over 100 videos on Bakhmut.
100.
Now that I have lost my main source of income.
100. Oh my god.
Now comes the question: what is the next thing to milk? Then I thought, okay, what is the one thing that never happens but everyone talks about? The offensives. So I already have a plan laid out for more than 10 videos about the offensives that is probably never going to happen.
Milk until the end.
Maybe I can reach 100 on those as well.
Rommel the Milkman.
Something very interesting is
just the way you said that name. Yeah?
Look at the name.
Yeah, this is what I was saying.
Yeah.
Anyways,
a few moments later.
Something very interesting that I know. I don't know how you guys put on that mask.
DPA is the biggest. He knows.
He's a legend.
He's a legend. He keeps poker face. I know who would lose at poker. Okay. I'm not cutting this, but okay.
Something very interesting about
here, I'll zoom you in.
I noticed is that we keep hearing the narrative from Western media that essentially the Russian capabilities are gone. They have 97% of the army in the battle zone. They don't have any tanks. They've lost 2/3 of their tanks. I don't understand. They claim they've lost 2,000 tanks and they've lost 2/3. So they believe Russia has 3,000 tanks. That makes no sense at all. Regardless of all that, we then see a contradictory article by CNN saying, quoting a US general of the European theater of NATO, claiming that although they have casualties throughout this war, their army is actually bigger than at the start of the war. They have more soldiers, more tanks, more everything than at the start. They are contradicting themselves. And it's very easy to see which is the reality and which isn't, except for the fact that Russia is making themselves look weaker. And I say that because it makes no sense for Russia to be weaker today than they were at the start of the war, based on the fact that they have mobilized, they have done a lot of these things. So the issue is, if Russia is stronger today, but it shows as if they are weaker, that means that they're using this tactic. Show that you are weak when you're strong, strong when you're weak. And if we see Ukraine parading. They are very strong. They have the Leopard tanks. They're gonna get the F-16s. They're superhumans. Maybe we should take that with a grain of salt and realize that the reality of the situation isn't apparent. It's not clear to us, because number one rule of war is truth dies first. So in the end, the only thing. Dude, I try to be serious, but then I have a CIA, an expert, and it's a lot.
1 hour later.
Thank you everyone for watching until the end. And if you want to see all 4 of us reunited again, smash the like button. All right. See you.
And welcome to the headquarters.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Restart. Cut all this.
Welcome to the headquarters.
And obviously, and welcome to the headquarters. Thank you for staying until the end of part 2 of this special headquarters meetup. If you already haven't done so, make sure to check out part 1 of this epic roundtable on the left side.